if you're listening to this and you feel stuck. I want to start off by saying something very simple. There's a reason for that. A lot of men assume that they're stuck because they don't have enough discipline, or they don't want it bad enough, or they're just wired this way. Sometimes that's true. However, most of the time, it is not. Most of the time, what's really going on is that you're carrying a story that you were never meant to carry, that you never chose for yourself. For some men, it's their past. It's brokenness. It's loss. It's trauma. It's abandonment. It might be a childhood that taught you things before you ever had the words for them. For other men, it's later wounds. It might be betrayal. It might be humiliation. It might be failure, addiction, regret. Either way, it lives deep in the body. So when life hits you now, whether it's stress, whether it's conflict, whether it's criticism, you're not responding only to the moment that's in front of you right now. You're responding to the moment plus everything you're still carrying that's behind you. And we hear it called today a lot of times as victim mentality. Guys, suffering is real. There's no doubt about that. So I'm not talking about someone saying, I've suffered. What I'm talking about is the place where your pain becomes the explanation for everything. And it becomes your permission to stay stuck. This comes out sounding like things like, you don't know what I've been through. This is just how I am. I can't change because of what happened. I'm trying, but my past keeps on beating me. If you had my story, you'd get it. I'm just waiting for life to calm down just for 1 minute. It can sound like all of those things. And here's the tricky part. You were really hurt. You were really dealt a bad hand. But the problem is when those truths actually become your cage. Because a man, he can be wounded and still be responsible. A man can have real pain and still take real steps. A man can be honest about what happened and still decide what happens next. Victim mentality doesn't always come out loud like it does on the streets of Minneapolis right now. A lot of times it's quiet. A lot of times for us men, it's very quiet. It's in the way that we default to being helpless. It's the way that we assume that we're going to be misunderstood. And when we feel like we're going to be misunderstood, we stop trying. It's the way that you keep your head down, and you call it humility, but it's really fear. And it shows up in normal life. You keep the peace at home, but you feel that resentment building. You avoid hard conversations, and you feel numb inside. You're working nonstop, so you don't have to feel what's underneath. You scroll on your phone, you snack, you're drinking, or you hide in your hobbies because your inner world is just too loud. You tell yourself, this is just stress, but it's actually that old pain looking for a place to land. And I want to talk to you about a verse that really matters with all this. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. That's Psalm 27. And it matters because it doesn't deny forsaking. It actually names it clearly. But it refuses to let that forsaking be the final truth. the final truth is the Lord receives. There's also a scene in John 5 where Jesus walks up to a man who has been stuck for 38 years and asks him a question, a very uncomfortable question, and he does it with intent. He says, "Do you want to be healed?" Jesus doesn't ask, "Do you want to be understood?" He doesn't ask, "Do you want to explain yourself?" He asked, "Do you want to be healed?" Comfort without healing, guys, it's a warm prison, is all it is. It's a comfortable prison. So today I'm going to share my story with you about abandonment. I'm going to share that story in foster care, adoption, and how it formed that victim mentality inside of me. I'm going to talk about comments as a child that cut deeper than they should have. And I'm going to tell you about a nightmare that kept on showing up for me night after night. I'm also going to tell you about the night that God met me in a way that I'll never be able to explain fully. I'm also going to give you a simple process that you can use so you stop drifting and you start moving without pretending your past never happened. And I want to be clear. This episode is not about blaming your parents. It's not about weaponizing your trauma or making your wife responsible for healing you. It's about becoming honest enough to see what's driving you so that you can lead. Your home's going to follow you and the temperature of your soul. When your soul is stuck, your leadership's going to be stuck. When your soul is surrendered, your leadership becomes steady. This is the Sacred Gentleman Podcast. The Sacred Gentleman is a movement that calls men out of comfort and back into God's design, while forming leaders of presence, purpose, and generational legacy. I'm Steve Baumgartner, your host, and if your past has been keeping you stuck, I want to help you take a real step forward. I grew up with abandonment in my bones. You know, I've talked about it before, but foster care, adoption. My early childhood was the first lesson that a child should never have to have. The lesson that I never got to learn was safety. Instead, it was replaced with, it's unsafe and you can be left. And when you grow up like that, you carry what I call an invisible weight. People don't see it when you walk into a room, but you feel it in your chest. You feel it in how quickly that you interpret someone else's tone. You feel it in your need to be liked. You feel it in your fear of being corrected, your sensitivity to rejection. And you carry stories like, people leave. I'm the odd man out. I have to earn love from other people. If I mess up, I lose everything. And I am definitely not chosen. And when that story is running under the surface, it changes how you experience life. You know, a secure kid that came up in safety and loving household and all that, they can hear a joke. They can get criticism. And they can shrug it off. Many kids who grew up like I did, who carry this abandonment and this hurt and this rejection, they hear that same joke and it lands like a verdict. And that's what was going on with me at the time. When the hard times hit, I didn't just feel the moment. I couldn't shrug it off. I felt that moment plus everything that I was already carrying. You guys might know exactly what I mean. I'm not the only one who's ever experienced trauma. You know, you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, you've got a job, maybe you own your own business. You might have a wife, kids, your responsibilities are stacking up, payments, mortgage, utilities, business expenses. And on paper, you're doing everything that you're supposed to be doing. You're doing fine. But inside, that younger version of you is still bracing for impact. And you've learned how to function while bracing. You figured out how to provide. You perform every day. You get things done. But there's this low-grade tension in your body, and you don't know how to turn it off. Guys, that's not a weakness, okay? That's your nervous system. That's your nervous system that learned how to survive at an early age. But you can't allow that survival technique to be your permanent identity. Not if you want to lead your home. When I was younger, kids would call me fat, and it hurt. It hurt a lot. While I was growing, I would put on weight and then I would grow up. But for the majority of the time, I was overweight. My mother even called it out. And I don't mean it bothered me for a second. It hit something deeper inside of me. It wasn't about the weight. It was about belonging. It was about my self-worth. It was about being chosen. I can remember that feeling when someone would call me fat, when they would make fun of me. I can remember that feeling where you feel that heat inside your body. And you have the urge to laugh it off so they can't tell that it bothered you and that you don't look weak. And then that quiet moment later where you're alone and it continues to replay in your head over and over again. That's how shame works. Guys, let me be honest. That's how Satan works. It doesn't just hurt in public. It follows you home. He follows you home. When you're already at this point of feeling unwanted at the deepest level, you start hearing everything through that same frequency. So a comment about your body becomes a comment about your value. That laugh from other people becomes a signal that you're not safe. That look becomes a reminder that you don't fit. And then there was football in the 7th grade. And I remember this time when my football coach was sending me in. And it must have been a scrimmage or something. But anyways, I had all of these emotions and thoughts and everything peaking at this point in time in my life. And my coach sent me out to the field with the play. And by the time I got out there, I forgot the play. I absolutely forgot the play. And we looked like idiots out on the field. There's no doubt about it. We looked like idiots. And the first thing that my coach said to me was he came over and he looked me in the face and he asked me if I was effing retarded. And he didn't do it quietly. The entire team heard it. He didn't do it as a correction. He wasn't trying to help me. It was a label. And my body started reacting almost instantaneously. Once again, my face got hot. My throat tightened. My chest squeezed in. And my internal dialogue started immediately. It told me, see, Steve, this proves it. You don't belong. You're not enough. You'll never be enough. Here's the part that matters. As a kid, I didn't know what to do with that pain. I didn't have anywhere to put it. So I turned it inward. And that's what a lot of men do. That's what a lot of children do. You take insults and you swallow it. And then it becomes a belief. And that belief it's continually shaping you as a man. You stop trying in certain areas. Why? Because you already know how it ends. You become overly sensitive to correction. You become a perfectionist, so no one can label you again. Or you become the guy who just absolutely doesn't care, because caring is actually dangerous to your emotions. And this is how triggers stack up. The insult on the football field, it wasn't only about football. It had connected itself to older wounds and really just became a new piece of evidence. Victim mentality, it gathers evidence. Satan uses that evidence to keep us locked in a cage. But that victim mentality, Satan, it stacks moments and it says, look, this is who you are. And if you don't challenge that story, you're going to spend your entire adult life reacting to your past as if it's happening right now. You'll get corrected at work and feel like you're being rejected. Your wife will disagree with you and you feel like you're being abandoned. Your kids will test a boundary and you feel like you're failing. And this is when men either shut down, they explode, or they escape. Not because you're a bad man, but because your body thinks it needs to go into survival mode again. I'm going to tell you something today that there's only one person in this entire world that actually knows, and that's my wife. So we're going to go from one person to anybody who listens to this episode. I'm going to get really vulnerable here for a second and talk about a nightmare that I used to have. So after I was adopted, I started having these recurring nightmares. And when I say they were recurring, they were probably 3 to 4 times a week until I was 20. Anyways, as I look back, I can see exactly what was happening. So, in the real world, right, my adopted dad, I'm going to call him Dad. He is my father. My dad absolutely hated seasonings. He grew up in a household, and there were some medical reasons for it. I won't go into that. But he grew up in a household where everything was made very bland. And he grew up like that, and that's the taste that he acquired from eating like that his whole life. That was in real life, okay? And in real life, I personally was always searching for validation and approval from my dad. And I want to make sure that we're clear when I'm talking about my dad. He didn't do anything wrong. I was holding him to a standard of my pain. But I also felt like the odd man out in my family. You know, I saw this relationship that he had with my older brother and my younger brother. My dad really loves sports. He'll sit and watch any sport that's on. My older brother was a really good runner, cross country, track and field, all that kind of stuff. My little brother was an amazing baseball player. He loved sports. They loved sports. They naturally connected. But at that point in my life, I could care less about sports. I was trying to deal with what was going on inside of me. I was drawing. I was reading. I was hiding. I was escaping. But we didn't connect in that same way. I didn't feel like I ever connected with my father. And when you don't connect, what ends up happening is that you start performing. You try and earn things that other people have already gained. You try to earn the thing that you're afraid that you're never going to receive freely, his approval and his love. So going back to the dream, I don't know why I had this dream, and it seems really weird now. But in that dream, I'm cooking something for this man, for my father. I'm pretty sure it was chicken. It was quite a few years ago, a couple decades. And anyways, I can remember the feelings more than I can remember the dream itself. But I remember this feeling of immense joy. And when I say that, it's not the joy of a kid playing, but it's the joy of a kid who earned the approval of his father. It's also the joy of the father who's approving of his son. And I felt this joy inside this dream. And I prepare this chicken and I serve it to my father, right? And he's joyous. And he uses that knife and fork and he cuts that first piece of chicken and he puts it in his mouth. And it was a big bite. And then everything changes in the dream. There was too much salt on the chicken. And his face shifts. The approval that was once there, that was just there, it disappears. And in the dream, it turns to rage. And I don't know why to this day, except for Satan was really playing a big part in this separation all along. But I don't know why this dream had to end with my father shoving me into that hot oven so that I could be served as dinner. You know, I know that's a dream. I know it's a nightmare. I knew it was a nightmare back then. I knew it wasn't real. But that dream, it carried a message for me. It carried the message of, if I don't get it perfect, I'm going to get burned. So it was a performance-based love for me. And that performance-based love created a man who was never at rest. He can be successful and still feels like he's about to fail. He can be married and still feel like love should turn to rage. He can be praised and still feel like the next mistake is going to expose him. So he overcompensates, or he avoids, or he numbs, or like me, does all of them. Here's something that I want to get across as gently as possible. A lot of men still don't realize that they're still trying to earn love from someone who isn't even in the room anymore. I lived a couple decades holding on to trying to get approval from people who weren't in the room anymore, to earn love from them. You know, you might still be looking for your father's approval. You might still be proving yourself to that coach. Maybe you're still arguing with the kid who mocked you. And the person that pays the price for all that, it's not your father. It's not your coach. It's not those kids who mocked you. Who pays the price is your wife. It's your kids. It's your own nervous system. It's your peace. I held on to that nightmare for years. For years, guys. It didn't just disappear. It loosened its grip little by little. And for me, that process started with forgiveness. But the turning point is pretty dramatic. And that turning point came in a moment where I was completely done. This happened over time. But there was a night that God met me in a way that changed the entire direction of my life. When I was 22 years old, I was arrested. I had completely given up on life. After getting arrested, I had completely given up. I told my 3 children that I would never see them again. And I walked away that night. Because I was told that my charges that I had been arrested for equaled 36 years federally. Felony, burglary, manufacturing, intent to distribute, assault charges, and the list goes on. And any way that I looked at that, my children were going to grow up without a father, even if they reduced the years. I remember back then I had thoughts of taking my own life. And I actually was going to do it one night on a park bench. And I don't remember what stopped me, because I have a loss of a lot of my memories from back in those days. It was like my mind went into darkness to be able to survive. But I do remember coming to, and it could have been the same day, it might have been multiple days, I don't know. But I was on the sidewalk in front of my dad's house. For clarification, my adopted dad. And I remember lifting my head up off from that sidewalk. And I looked up and I saw the house. And I wasn't sure how I got there at that moment. But now, I know where it came from. I know who put me there. But I remember thinking, I better go in and tell mom and dad goodbye. Even though we hadn't talked for quite a while. They had disowned me and what I was at that point in time to protect themselves. Guys, it was dark outside. It was dark outside. The only light was coming from the opposite corner street lamp. And I looked up at the door, and you could see the street lamp was reflecting off from the storm door. But other than that, the house was dark, and it was very quiet. So, to paint the picture, this house is one of those old 1920s, four-square homes, 2 stories, white, had that porch that went all the way across the front. It was, 15 feet deep or so. And it had that green, horrible plastic carpet. And the front door was this solid wood door with decorative glass in the front. And it had a storm door. And it was aligned perfectly with the 3 steps leading up to the porch. I remember sneaking in and out of that front door growing up. And sneaking out of it was hard as all get out. Because that storm door, when you'd open it, it'd go... Sorry if that was the most horrible noise that you heard on this podcast. But it was loud. It would squall like that. And I think my dad left it like that so that he could hear us sneaking out. But probably even more so when we were coming back in, he was sneaky like that. Anyways, it would squall when you moved it. And like I said, that night when I looked up at the house was dark. So dark, and I didn't know what time it was. I was high. I wasn't in my right mind. I didn't know what day it was, what time it was, anything. So I didn't know if he and my mom were even home or if they were asleep. I didn't know anything. In all fairness, I was hoping that they weren't going to be home, because even though I committed myself in one part of my mind or soul that I was going to go tell them goodbye, in the other parts of my being, I didn't want to face them. But I made my way to those stairs, and on my hands and knees I crawled up them. And I remember nearing the top, because something just, you get those feelings, right? And I looked up again, and my dad was standing there, and he had his hand out, offering to help me up. And all I could think in that moment was, how did he get there? I was on the stairs, and I was just thinking about that front door that squawked, and he helped me up. And as he helped me up, he pulled me into an embrace. And that embrace, it's so hard to explain. And I don't think I ever can adequately. But it felt like it was more than him. It felt like it was more than me. It felt like more than what earth could even offer. And it felt eternal. This embrace, this hug that he gave me, it felt like it lasted forever, even though it may have only been a couple seconds. It was like time and space completely collapsed in that moment. And in that embrace, I felt God's love for me for the very first time in my life. It was so much different than any feeling I had ever had. Today I see meaning in that encounter. At the time, I only felt, but I've thought about it a lot over the years. And I see the meaning. It was like God was directly speaking to me in that moment, telling me, son, I have always been here. Son, I love you. Son, you were chosen. Son, you are mine. And son, all you need to do is be ready to accept that love. And I also see the meaning in God meeting me through my adopted father. Biblically, that makes perfect sense. And ever since then, my dad, that's what he's been to me, is the man who resembles the Father here on earth. The man who adopted me. The man who chose me. The man who said, you, son, are mine, and signed the paperwork with the judge. That moment right there is where my forgiveness with God began. I was angry with God. I rebelled against God. I chose Satanism and the cult for a time because of my anger with God. But that moment, that's when my forgiveness started. I started to reconnect. I left those childish, those rebellious ways behind. And I started moving closer to Him. That day, God did two distinct things. The first thing that He did was He actually snatched up that physical addiction to meth that I was carrying. Guys, I want to be absolutely straight with you. I was doing an 8-ball a day back then. That's why I had to manufacture. That's why I had to deal, was because there's no way I was going to be able to afford my habit. My addiction, it was serious. It was very serious. But the other thing He did was He left me with every single one of my negative behaviors. And now I understand that He did that so that He could strengthen me. But if I'm being honest, that day my life was saved and I was very happy for that for a while. But later, I got very bitter about that. Because, I expected that rescue in that to equal an entire transformation. But the drugs were just a mask. He removed the mask to forge me into who I am today. And I expected that instant transformation, but that's not how He works. Salvation can be in a moment, but formation is a process. And that process is where the old victim identity, it either dies away or it finds a new way to survive. Us men can get clean physically, but still be an orphan emotionally. We can put down the substance and pick up a new coping mechanism. We can stop the obvious sin and keep the same patterns: avoidance, manipulation, anger, control, numbness. And when those behaviors keep showing up, you can get discouraged and say, see, I'm broken. I'm never going to change. That's victim mentality. The truth is, God saves us. And then if you accept it, he can teach us how to live again. He can pull you out of the ditch and then give you the chance to learn how to walk straight. And guys, I made the choice not to walk straight. I did for a little while, and then I started to veer off. And let me tell you, that saying that they state, that hurt people, it's absolutely true. And I did that. For many years, I did that. I hurt people with my strength. I hurt people with my words. I hurt people with selfishness. I hurt people with the way that I would go cold emotionally instead of being present. I hurt people by not dealing with what was inside of me. And I'm saying that because there's men listening right now who might be clean. And when I say clean, I'm not talking about alcohol or drugs primarily, but it might be that something was lifted off from you, but you still have your behaviors. Or it might be that you're sober, or you're doing better. But this man, his wife still doesn't feel safe. His kids still feel the distance. And they don't understand why. It's because behavior is deeper than all of that. Behavior is where your heart shows up. And guys, when you've lived in survival mode for years, your behaviors become automatic. You do things like lie to avoid consequences. You hide to avoid shame. You control to avoid fear. You attack to avoid vulnerability. You withdraw to avoid pain. Those are all survival modes, and they make sense until they start destroying the life you say you want. So when I say I let victim mentality go little by little, that's exactly what I mean. I had to unlearn all these survival techniques, all these survival, and I had to replace it with being a son, with sonship. I had to learn presence. This is where it gets personal. Victim mentality doesn't just keep you sad. It keeps us immature as men. It keeps us reactive. It keeps you from becoming the man your family needs. Let's take it back to scripture for a minute. Psalm 27, we talked about that before. It says, "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me." That verse names the wound, but it also names the cure. Forsaking is real, but it's not final. The Lord still receives. If you don't let that land in your soul, you'll continue to live like an orphan. You're going to chase approval. You're going to fear rejection. You'll read everyone's tone as anger or danger. You'll overreact to small things because your body is still trying to protect the little boy who didn't feel chosen. John 5 is the other anchor I want you to think about. Jesus asked the man, "Do you want to be healed?" And that question is Jesus showing his mercy. Because it brings you out of that explanation and into personal agency. An explanation can be true and also be a cage. Yes, you were hurt. Yes, you were wronged. Yes, you may not have got what you needed growing up. But Jesus is asking, do you want to stay there? But I also want you to notice what the man did. He explains it. I have no one, he says. And Jesus didn't debate him. He didn't shame him. Instead, he asks him to take action. He says, get up, take your bed, and walk. He didn't say it harshly. He said it with love. Because, guys, I talk about this all the time. Love isn't always sympathetic, but love always leads. And then let's switch over to Genesis 50, verse 20. Joseph says, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. He names the evil. He doesn't deny it, but he refuses to let that evil be the author of his identity. And that's how you exit victim mentality. You stop letting the past be the writer of your future. You can say, that was real, that hurt, that changed me, but you can also have a comma and finish the sentence with something like, God is still writing my story. God is still redeeming me. My story, it's not over yet. And brother, this is where you get your feet under you again. It's not by erasing the past, but by placing it under a larger story. One more way to think about this is, if you're being received, it changes the way you interpret everything. If you believe that you're received, that correction, it stops feeling like a rejection. If you believe you're received, that hard conversation, it stops feeling like abandonment. If you believe you're received, you can apologize without collapsing, and you can hear feedback without becoming defensive. But if you still believe you're an orphan, then everything becomes a threat. A raised eyebrow feels like they're done with me. A quiet tone feels like I'm about to get left. A mistake feels like I'm back where I started. That's why Psalm 27, it isn't just poetry. It's a spiritual foundation. It's God saying, even if the people you needed didn't show up the way they should have, I'm still here. I'm not leaving. And the question from John 5 is the moment where faith becomes action. Do you want to be healed? Is Jesus asking, are you willing to move with me? Because healing is only what God does to you. It's what God does with you. Sometimes the first step is small, like telling the truth to one person, admitting you've been stuck, asking for prayer, getting help, confessing what you've been hiding, forgiving someone who doesn't actually deserve it, or finally forgiving yourself and living like grace is real. Small steps, repeated, change the man. All right, let's get ready to close this thing out. But first, let's talk about some reps. Let's talk about some action you can do in this next week. Rep number 1. Every morning, print this out, write it down, what have you. I want you to read Psalm 27, verse 10 out loud. Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me. And then I want you to say out loud, I am received. Now, what you're dealing with might not be your father and your mother, but put anything in there. Anything that's holding you back. The real grace in there is the Lord will receive me. Now, if you can't say it with emotion, I want you to say it anyways. The truth will retrain your inner world, and I guarantee you that the emotion will come. Rep number 2, when you get triggered, I want you to use this nest principle. Take out a piece of paper and a pen and write it down. You're going to name the feeling and the story. You're going to expose the lie. You're going to select God's word, and you're going to take action on it. This is how you're going to stop reacting, and you're going to start leading yourself. Until you can lead yourself, you can't lead others. Rep number 3. I want you to choose one forgiveness step this week. Just one. One person, one wound, one prayer of release. And you don't have to finish it all at once. You just have to start. Rep number 4. I want you to identify your bed, your mat from John 5. I want you to identify that excuse, that bitterness, that coping habit, that avoidance, whatever it is. I want you to name it. And then what I want you to do is I want you to pick it up. And don't live there anymore. Rep 5. I want you to take one small act of ownership today. I want you to send that text that you've been avoiding. I want you to schedule the conversation. I want you to show up at the gym. I want you to take your wife on a walk. I want you to read with your kid. I want you to confess your sin. I want you to call your brother. Whatever that next right thing is, I want you to do it. Rep 6. I want you to select one boundary that protects your personal peace. Guys, if you're always available, you're going to be ruled by everyone else's emotions. I want you to pick a boundary this week. What does that boundary look like for you? Is it putting your phone down at dinner? Is it by having no screens after a certain time? Is it a weekly check-in with your wife? A daily 10-minute quiet time? Is it a brotherhood text? Guys, you don't need a massive overhaul. You simply need to realign the signal to your soul. The signal that says, I'm leading again. And we got into some dark stuff today, guys. And if you've been listening to this and it's been hitting you and it's brewing up some emotions, maybe some that have been dormant for a very long time, maybe some that have been alive and well within you. If you're in a dark place right now, if you're in a place where I was multiple points in my life, where I thought about ending my own life, don't carry that kind of stuff alone. I want you to tell someone about that today. Whether it's a friend, whether it's a pastor, a priest, your wife, a counselor. And if you feel like you're in immediate danger, I want you to call those emergency numbers. Guys, your life matters. Getting help is not a failure. It's wisdom. It's maturity. It's actually strength. And if you're doing this alone, I want you to hear me and hear me clearly. Men were not meant to do deep work alone. You need a fraternity. You need a brotherhood. You need accountability. You need refinement. You need men to stand around you, to lift you up, hold you accountable, and all of those kind of things that a great group of men can offer. The Bible says, iron sharpens iron. My good friend Gary says, only at the right angle. So pick the right brothers. Now, if you want structured formation, that's what I do inside of my sacred code formula. But we also have this thing called the Knight's Order. It's already a brotherhood. It's already structured. It already meets once a week. Either way, don't drift after this episode. Text your brother today. Tell him what you're working on. All right, let me close in a simple prayer. Father, receive this man who's listening to this podcast right now. Heal what is wounded within him. Give him courage without aggression and tenderness without compromise. Help him take up his bed and walk forward in freedom. In Jesus' name we pray. Brother, stillness, it creates availability. Availability is where your leadership begins.